Oh, can you hear me? All right, I'm trying to connect with Doc on our Zoom platform. We should be able to have him on very, very shortly. All right. Hello, Dr. Safo, can you hear me?
Yes, Kwame, I can hear you.
Okay, now we have you on phone. Good, 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 good. How are
Right.
you?
Kwame, I'm well. How are you too?
I'm well too. Thank you so much.
Rainy day.
Yes, it's well.
It rained heavily last night.
Yeah.
Very windy as well.
Yeah, that's true.
All the way through this morning.
And the weather's a lot better today. I mean, the past couple of days have been like hellfire. So
it's been hot.
It's been pretty hot, yeah. So I'm happy we did get some rain because now the weather's calm.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's a lot Absolutely. Better.
And I'm sure it's even cooler up the mountain, isn't it?
Oh, Kwame, it's fresh.
That's
it's fresh. This is what a tropical climate should look like.
Nah, I can imagine. Anyway, thanks for coming by today. I know today you're unable to come into the studio, but we still had to connect with you. So we finalized our conversation on eating disorders in teenagers.
Yep. So, good afternoon to all our listeners. And as you rightly mentioned, we started a not so common conversation about eating disorders. And it's one of the reasons why we should talk about it. Because it can be a very frustrating experience for both the young one, but particularly for the parents or the guardian.
Right.
So last week we realized that about 3 million teenagers around the world globally report eating disorders. But I think this is an underreported figure because in our part of the world, it is more of the food is not available, so if somebody is not eating,
yeah.
So I think that we don't quite recognize what that disorder is, but it is recognized under mental health disorders. I think last week we looked at the SIDU. Today we're going to delve deeper and look at the specifics. We'll start with probably the commonest, which we call anorexia nervosa. Anorexia nervosa. So AN for short. So Kwame, what is anorexia nervosa and how does it come about? Well, here there is a restriction of nutrient intake relative to requirement, which leads to significantly low body weight. So for every age, we have an appropriate weight, and we also have the baseline nutrient requirement. You talk to any registered dietitian, they will tell you about the nutrient requirement, especially for teenagers when they are going to go through that growth spurt. So here, the word is restriction. That connotes a certain deliberateness about what is happening. It is not that the economic situation, war, religious beliefs is causing that restriction, or is causing that imbalance between nutrient intake and the requirement. But rather, it is a deliberate restriction of nutrient intake relative to requirement, which ends up giving the person a smaller weight. So the individual with this eating disorder fails to recognize the seriousness of their significantly low body weight. They will not acknowledge that there's anything wrong with that, because that is the objective that they wanted to attain in the first place. Now, the etiology, asking how does it come about, we believe it is more of environmental, but then there's some biological factors at play as well. Increasingly, the world, or we are experiencing what we call globalization. Whatever is happening in in Ukraine, we get to experience it here. When you and I were much, much younger or teenagers, I don't think we were exposed to the number of Hollywood movies, US sport, English sport, as much as we are today. So we tend to see what is happening in other cultures, where models, actors, they are portrayed or they are required to have a certain level of thinness. And that is what gets them certain roles. But ordinarily, in our parts of the world, particularly females within a certain age group, are expected to carry. And particularly this problem, anorexia nervosa, there's a preponderance of females suffering it more than males. So, if you look at our cultural environment or the cultural environment, it is really not a problem. But because of that cultural importation through Netflix, Hollywood movies, now we've got access. Somebody's not gone to the US before, but they can tell you everything about what happens there or in the United Kingdom or Germany or South Africa. So usually that is what we are being sold. People forget that there are photographic enhancements or alterations, what we call photoshopping, just to portray a certain physique. So most people buy, or teenagers buy into it, and then they begin to see their current structure as odd, or they begin to think there's something wrong with the fact that they have a lot more flesh than what they see on TV. Again, if you want to be a long distance athlete, can be somebody like you. You can't do 5,000. 10,000. In fact.
Why not? Let me try and see.
Because you carry too much weight. So just look at all of them. Mo Farah, Gabriel Selassie. I mean, they look more like me, or I look more like them. So we begin to see these ones. These people are portrayed also as heroes. And if somebody wants to be a long distance runner, then they want to keep a certain physique. Was it yesterday that Simone Biles, the gymnast?
Yes.
Is that her name?
Yes, Simone.
Yes. I think she won the L'Oreal's female sports athlete of the year 2025. I think we all saw her exploit during the Olympic Games in Paris. And to be a gymnast, curves, it won't happen if you carry a certain weight or a certain physique. So, we believe that these are some of the reasons why we're beginning to see a lot more of these challenges in our environment. As I mentioned earlier, we see it more in females than males. Onset is usually in late adolescence and early adulthood. Studies show that the lifetime prevalence is less than 0.5%. So it's not a common disorder, and you may easily miss. Let's look at some of the risk factors. All right, childhood obesity. So individuals who are really plump, children who are really plump, they, by the time they get to the teenage years, they started a lot of stigma. I think these days we call it body shaming. All those things are becoming prominent, and then they want to cut down on their food and then attain a certain weight. So childhood obesity is a risk factor. Female sex is also a risk factor. Children with or teenagers with mood disorders, those with personality traits, we call it impulsivity and perfectionism. These are some personality traits. Individuals who have suffered sexual abuse. So, this is one thing that we tend not to pay attention to even when we are treating patients or young people who have been defiled. They get to know intuitively that they are sexually appealing. They have blossomed sexually. And that is why a man defiled them or raped them. They know that. So what do they try to do? Well, then I have to look like my prepubertal physique once again. So they want to change what has happened naturally them, and then they go or they develop this eating disorder because they want to look like a child again. And in their mind, if I look like a child, then a man will not look at me and have any such thought. Right. So, Kwame, how do we clinch the diagnosis of anorexia nervosa? Well, there are certain pointers that your doctor would look at, or even as a parent, you can begin to also look at eating. The first one is a refusal to maintain a body weight at or above a minimally normal weight for age and height. So, Kwame, I mentioned earlier that for every age and every height, we've got an appropriate weight. So there are weight charts that we use. Every parent who attended a child welfare clinic in Ghana, we call them the weighing card. If you take that weighing card, you will see some growth chart in there. For every age, we track or we expect a certain weight. So there are certain percentiles or curves that we expect the child to follow. We do this, we track this all the way to 5 months. 5 years. 5 years, 60 months.
Okay.
So, unfortunately, a lot of the parents, when they come in and they finish their last vaccination, which is at 18 months, no, they won't come for the weighing, as they call it again, but it's not just weighing. So, if you go online, there are a lot of growth charts. You can check with your doctor, if you have doubts, your pediatrician, and find out if my child is 10 years, what is the appropriate weight. We would also take the height, and then we would estimate the appropriateness of the weight. We do not want the weight, or the weight should not be less than 85% of what is expected. So even if you don't clench the expected 100%, we should not be less than 85% of the expected. Right. The second pointer is the intense fear of gaining weight or becoming fat, even though the person is skinny. All right. So that's one also other pointer. The third one is a disturbance in the way in which one's body weight or shape is experienced, or undue influence of body weight or shape on self-evaluation. So when you find the person standing in front of the mirror for many hours a day, the way they evaluate themselves about who they are and their self-worth is based on how they look. If you notice as a parent that that is how your child is evaluating herself or his self-worth, that may be a problem, because ordinarily most of us would not put that emphasis on our physical attributes in terms of how we look at that age. Then lastly, another pointer is that in females or teenage females who have started menstruating, if all of a sudden they stop menstruating, of course the first thing you check is that they are not pregnant. That's the first one.
Very important.
But the absence of at least 3 menstrual cycles when your teenage female is not pregnant should be a pointer because the hormonal cycle is influenced by hormones and then also one's nutritional status and energy levels. So these are some of the pointers that to get you to call your family doctor or get an appointment with a pediatrician in a hospital that has one.
Okay.
Now, when you come in, there are some screening questions that you ask. How do you feel about your body? Are there parts of your body that you might see when you look at yourself in the mirror? Do you see yourself as overweight, underweight, or satisfactory? Have you ever been on a diet? So these are some of the questions. We have this standard questionnaire that we use, and you'd find a lot of these questions in there. Right. Now, what are some of the physical symptoms of anorexia nervosa? Well, the first thing is that they may experience what we call core body temperature dropping, and they may feel cold because they lack a lot of fat. Subcutaneous fat, that is fat that is under the skin, is actually a thermal insulator. It keeps us warm. So, I'm always worried the missus that she's got more fat than I do. So, but she's the one who's always under the duvet. And I'm like, but side says you've got your thermal insulator, natural thermal insulator. So let me see. Have the duvet. I do have a lot of fat. In terms of power science, don't put that there. So when somebody is malnourished, they tend to lose a lot of fat under the skin, and they may experience what we call hypothermia, and they tend to report being colder than normal. So if you're home with your child, the weather is not so cold, but he's always complaining about feeling cold, and you obviously are concerned about their weight. It may be one of the physical symptoms. Well, when they come in, some of them have a very low heart rate, what we call bradycardia. They may experience dizziness and lightheadedness, and occasional fainting spell. They may also experience fatigue and constipation, inability to concentrate. They are increasingly irritable, and some actually experience depression. They withdraw. They're always locked up in their room, curled up in bed. They're not taking part in any activities that other members of the family are taking part. Their grades are suffering in school. These are all pointed. And then again, you may experience amenorrhea, which is that the menses stop in girls who have already started menstruating. So we'll look at all of them.
Okay.
Once we have clinched the diagnosis, then there's a nutritional assessment. So that is where the dietitian would come in. I'll pass you off onto my dietitian, and then she'll do a thorough assessment of your caloric intake. And some of the shocking things you will find is that a teenager growth spurt. You expect them to be eating where you are hiding food. Sometimes you get feedback and say that in anorexia nervosa, the calorie intake is between 100 and 200 kilocalories a day. That is extremely low. Most people are doing 1,002, 1,003 a day. So to be doing between 100 and 200 kilocalories a day is really, really low. The dietitian will also do a weight assessment, and then we'll calculate things like the body mass index. And if the body mass index for a teenager generally less than 17.5, it will indicate significant malnutrition. We would also order some laboratory investigations that would help us assess the degree of the problem, as well as look out for complications that have started developing. Remember last week I shared some of the medical challenges that these eating disorders can pose. So a poor blood count, your HB, for example. So iron. If iron intake is very poor, your HB tends to be low. If your folic acid intake is poor, your HB may be low. If your vitamin B12 intake is poor, it would also show in the full blood count. We also measure electrolytes. These are salts, potassium, sodium, chloride. We'll also perform a kidney function test. We'll do what we call calcium assay and magnesium liver function test, thyroid function test. We'll examine the urine. It gives us some significant pointers about starvation. There's something we call keto. Kwame, I'm sure you've heard of the ketogenic diet.
Yes, I've heard of it.
These are things that produce ketone bodies. Ketone bodies represent to us, as doctors, tells us about starvation or nutritional deprivation. Because when you are starved of glucose, your body falls on other molecules, proteins, fats, for energy. And when it breaks down proteins and fats for energy instead of glucose, you get some byproducts. And these byproducts are called ketone bodies. The ketone bodies can be found in the urine. So a doctor will do a urine examination. Of course, we do the urine examination also to put out pregnant in teenagers who have experienced amenorrhea or have stopped menstruating. We also do an electrocardiogram, an ECG, where we look at the electrical activity of the heart. There are some challenges there. And then lastly, in the facilities as this, we'll do what we call bone densitometry. We know that calcium is deposited into the bone to make them strong. We need vitamin D and calcium to mineralize the bone. And you see a lot of that happening in the teenage period. So a way of measuring the density of the bone, meaning the amount of calcium, vitamin D that you deposit into the bone, is what we call the densitometry. But not readily available test, but sometimes can be done. And in people with anorexia nervosa, you'd always see that the bone densitometry is very, very low.
Okay.
So, Kwame, this is anorexia nervosa. Next week, we'll talk about bulimia and binge eating disorder. And then I think we'll field a lot of questions. And then I'll talk also about the treatment options, where the clinical psychologist or the psychiatrist and the pediatrician play a big role, as well as the dietitian.
No, this is very good, and this has been very informative. Thank you so much, Doc. For those who want to reach out to you, how do they do that?
Right. So those who want to come by at number 10 Kinto Street, at Salibochi School Junction and place. That's where our East Legon Hills branch is located. And then also we continue the conversation on our social media handles at Medicals GH for X and then Instagram. Our Facebook wall is Medicals Hospital. If you want to reach us on WhatsApp, it's 0501 477 340. 0501 477 340. And you can come by and see our pediatrician and also see our dietitian.
All right, Dr. Osafo, we're grateful. Thank you so much for this very important education. We're grateful. And we hope to see you next week as well as we continue the conversation on the eating disorders.
Absolutely.
Dr. Yaw Osafo is the CEO of Medicals Hospital, Mampo Equiapem and East Legon Hills. Stay tuned in.